Hello and welcome to the Embodied Astrology podcast. My name is Renee. I am so happy to be here with you for this episode, and we are going to be talking about Pisces season in 2025. This is the span of time between February 18th and March 20th. And whenever you happen to find this reading, even if it is beyond Pisces season, I think that there's something here for everybody at any time. So tune in with the deeper messages that you feel coming through in your own intuition. Remember that not everything is for everyone, and every astrologer is also a human being. So anyone giving a reading is going to come with their own ideas, opinions, biases, limitations, etc. Take what works, leave the rest, make the meanings that are most meaningful for you. So Pisces season is definitely a wild feeling season astrologically. There is a lot happening. Where do we begin? Do we start by talking about Mars stationing direct finally? Do we talk about the Venus and Mercury retrogrades that are coinciding and overlapping, moving from Pisces to Aries, back to Pisces, back to Aries again, and working with a solar eclipse in Aries? Do we talk about Neptune's upcoming ingress into Aries and later this year its subsequent return back to the last degree of Pisces? This is also working in tandem with Saturn's entry into Aries and then return back into Pisces. Or should we start with the eclipses? There's so much to talk about in Pisces season. In general, I'm going to say that this is a season that a lot of us are going to need to be really practicing centering and discernment. It is up to us on some levels to take care of everything that we possibly can for ourselves and for the world around us. And we cannot take care of everything and everybody, so we need to choose our battles wisely. But this is also a time definitely to be taking action, and action can happen on all kinds of levels. Internally, action can happen through our intention and focus and the ways that we talk to ourselves and treat ourselves. Externally, action is happening in the ways that we are relating with others and the choices and decisions and behaviors that come through in the relational field. There are so many actions that we would be well served to engage with when it comes to collective action and mobilizing around things that are really important, not just for the present time, but also for the past and the future. So I'm going to talk to you about all of that, but before I get into it, I want to let you know a couple of things. So first thing I want to let you know is that you can find meditation practices that I made especially for you, for your sun, moon, and rising signs, wherever you're finding this podcast or on our YouTube channel or at embodiedastrology.com in the member space. Those guided meditations are for your year ahead. They are for 2025 in general and potentially longer into the future if they serve you. These are meditations that came through for me when I was doing your readings for the year ahead. And they work to align you in your mind, heart, body, spirit, and energy field with what it feels like your sign is really working to learn and integrate and manifest in this year ahead. Now, you might be familiar with Pisces as an energy that is often talked about as a meditative kind of energy. Pisces describes the intuitive, psychic field. It is an energetic archetype that is available to all of us. We all have Pisces in our charts. And over the course of the upcoming season, Pisces is getting so stimulated by the sun's presence, by Mercury's presence. As I mentioned, there are a couple of retrogrades happening with all the personal planets, and they are all influencing Pisces placements in our charts. And one thing about Pisces that you'll come across when you're learning about astrology over and over again is that Pisces describes a kind of energy that can't really be described. So it is the ineffable, numinous, liminal space. It corresponds to our dreams and our imaginations and the ways that we are sensitive to vibrations and things that might not be easily explainable because they could exist beyond what's visible or beyond what we can understand through logic or mental analysis. And when we're working with Pisces energy, and again, we all have access to this energy. It is an archetypal energy that exists in the world and in our bodies and everywhere and everyone. So when we're working with this energy, a lot of times we are working with states of feeling kind of undone. We don't know how to put our finger on things. We don't have mental concepts that feel like we, quote unquote, know something. Pisces is heavy vibes, and it can be a really blissful, exalted, expanded, deeply spiritual, deeply creative experience to tune in with Pisces energy. And it can also be extremely uncomfortable. It can really unmoor us from our sense of solidity and foundation and what we think is real. One of the best ways to work with Pisces energy is through meditation. And for me, as an embodied astrologer with a lifelong spiritual practice and many forays into various meditation practices, these days I find myself most deeply gravitating towards somatic meditation. And many styles of meditation are inherently somatic, whether or not they say that they are or call themselves that. And when I say somatic meditation, I am referring to body-based awareness and some kind of practice that is about focusing and concentrating, using our minds to really connect and build coherence with our bodies and also with our hearts and our emotional and energetic fields. Your guided meditations that I made you for 2025 are these kinds of meditations. And as I mentioned, they are meant to help you align and integrate with what feel like the most important and powerful information and lessons that were coming through for me as a reader when I was looking at your years ahead. In Pisces season, I am offering you these meditations in place of sign-specific forecasts or readings. And I'm offering them to you for two reasons. One reason I've already talked about, it has to do with Pisces as an energy. I think that this period of time, and I'll talk about this coming up soon when I'm talking to the collective about Pisces season, this period of time is asking us in some ways to get less specific and expand our energy in new and different ways that in a lot of ways ask us to not know and to let go of the things that we think we know. And to really embrace a kind of broader perspective that includes spiritual orientation. So I want to offer you meditations in this season specifically to offer what I can to these kinds of themes coming in. And as I've already said twice now, I really hope that these meditations help you align with the greatest benefit that is possible for you in this year ahead. And as I'll talk to you about in those meditations, they are meant to be adapted. They are meant for you to work with them creatively, to modify them and play with them and apply them all over the place. The second reason that I'm offering you these meditations in place of sign-specific forecasts for the year ahead is that as a reader, I am changing. And as a human being, I also need breaks and time off. And the production cycle of doing readings for all 12 signs every month on top of everything else that I do at Embodied Astrology sometimes is too much for me. And like many people out there, especially moving into Pisces season, I have been struggling with some health challenges, and I just have not had the energy to be able to record new forecasts for all signs. And so I really want to give my energy in the ways that I can most effectively. And for me, this season, it feels like doing a reading for a collective and then continuing to attend to the ways that embodied astrology is changing and growing is where my energy is being called. And a new format for your season ahead readings has been wanting to come through for quite some time. It's been something I've been thinking about for over a year. And it's starting to become more clear. And it felt like Aries season was the time to begin that format. And I'm not going to tell you more for now. You're going to have to come back next month and find your Aries season reading for your sun, moon, or rising sign to find out what I'm going to be up to over the course of the next year with these free offerings. If you love this work and if it supports you, if you find it beneficial, please help me sustain it. Doing the work of embodied astrology really takes a lot. The number one way that you can help support and sustain this work is by sharing it. So please like, comment, and subscribe in the links below and send this off to your friends and networks. Let them know about what we do. Your financial donations and memberships are obviously so helpful and really support the sustained production of this free content, as well as a lot of what we do on the other end of embodied astrology, which is where I and we do most of our work. And you can find out more about what our memberships offer, again, in the links below, but they will give you access to me every week and every month. I am teaching on Zoom every Monday in somatic space. We do an embodied practice preparing us to work with the astrology of the week ahead. It is going to be our 2-year anniversary in Pisces season of somatic space, and I can tell you without a doubt that doing this practice weekly over the last 2 years has really changed my life. I hear from people who've been there for the entire 2 years and also who have joined recently that it is a really big benefit to them as well and creating a lot of change for them in their lives. So when we attune our energy with what's happening energetically on Earth and this greater mysterious universe that we are part of, that's when the magic of astrology really happens. Reading about it, listening to horoscopes, learning about it, that's all great. Theorizing about it, talking about it, super helpful. But when we really land it in our bodies and we begin to practice with it and meditate with it and align our energy with it, wow, things really start to line up. So we do that every single week at Somatic Space. And once a month, we also meet for tea time conversations. And this has been a space that's been growing at Embodied Astrology for several years now. It has become a really wonderful and very dear community. Friendships are being made there, community is being built, and a lot of us are really learning a lot about ourselves, about relating with other people, and of course about astrology. So if you are looking to make new connections, and if astrology and embodiment and community are things that you want more of in your life, then definitely check out the EA memberships. We also have study groups for those of you who are interested in learning more about astrology and want to learn in more decentralized, conversational, and casual ways. We have a chart reading study group that meets regularly. We also have special focus study groups that have come up at different points at Embodied Astrology, and there's always space for folks to focus on specific things like astrology for chronic illness or parenting or affinity groups, things like that. One of my favorite projects that Embodied Astrology is doing right now is called the Jupiter in Gemini Research Project. We are looking at astrology for movement organizing and activism. This has been a group that has been gathering since June of 2024, and it is so awesome. I'm really excited about it, and it's totally free to participate with. It is entirely volunteer-led and run. If you are interested in how astrology can help you and the causes that you are interested in supporting get more organized and strategic, definitely check out the Jupiter in Gemini Research Project. Finally, Embodied Astrology offers all kinds of programming. We have regular classes, workshops, community conversations, and guest events. Last year in Aries season, we initiated an experimental year-long astrology school. We had a very ambitious year-long season of programming, and that is coming to a close in Pisces season. So we have the last 3-part devotional cycle with Sherry Taylor. Sherry has been an astrologer in a research residence with us for over 2.5 years. Learning about Saturn in its femme and queer faces. Saturn in mythology, as you may know, often gets pigeonholed as a dry, crusty, restrictive, kind of old man feeling. Sherry is really helping us expand the archetype. And I'm going to be talking a lot about Saturn in today's episode because Saturn is currently in Pisces. Though in 2025, Saturn will make its first ingress into Aries and a new cycle is coming up. But a lot of what I'm going to be sharing about Saturn is coming from what Sherry has shared with me and inspiration from her work. I'm so grateful to Sherry for bringing her research to Embodied Astrology. And if you haven't yet had an opportunity to study with her, don't miss out. It is a really incredible experience and an amazing body of work that she has put together. In Pisces season, we will also have our culminating artistic alchemy full moon gathering with Junauda Petrus. Junauda, an award-winning playwright, author, and this year's poet laureate for Minneapolis, has graced Embodied Astrology with her presence every single month, offering full moon gatherings that really help serve and support artistry in our lives and in the ways that we relate to ourselves and each other. These spaces are for everyone, so you don't need to identify as an artist. You just need to be interested in cultivating your own creativity and really communing with your own creative spirit. Every single month, Junauda puts together a really fun practice playlist, different prompts to get our artistic minds and bodies activated. And the best part of those groups is really the community aspect and the conversations that happen there. They feel really special, important, and timely. Junauda and Sherry will definitely be in the EA family, hopefully forever, and will continue to offer classes and workshops with us in the future, but we are moving into a year of more experimental and fluid programming. We're not setting up a big plan for ourselves. And this is also by design because of what 2025 is bringing astrologically. And I'm going to be sharing a little bit more about that with you in this episode. You can find everything that we do at embodiedastrology.com. If you join our membership, you'll also get access to special live conversations that we have with faculty like Sherry, Junauda, and Ramon Parish, who I talked to last month in Aquarius season. We had an amazing conversation on the Aquarius new moon where we looked at Pluto's 20-year transit in Aquarius. We really considered a lot of what these themes and resonances are on a collective level. We made a shorter podcast of that conversation. You can listen to that and get a taste of what it's like, but being in the live group, you also get to be part of the conversation and hear what other people are talking about as well. And that is such a big part of what we do at Embodied Astrology. Our whole project is about sharing the language of astrology and using it to empower ourselves and one another to make our own meanings. Astrology is always happening. We all get access to it. We are all entitled to work with it. And it's definitely not a formula cookbook that, only specific people have information about interpreting. And the more that we can all use it together, I think the better it's going to become. So I hope you'll join us at EA sometime soon. Once again, you can find all the information in the show notes below. The last thing I'm going to say is that I am so excited to be on the roster for the Living Astrologies Conference organized by Jason Hawley, who is a teacher of mine and really incredible astrologer who is doing such deep embodied archetypal work, who is really committed to ways of working with astrology that are creative, that are land-based, that are really quite relational. And he has put together the first ever of its kind astrology conference that is really focused on these ways of working with astrology. And if you're an astrology enthusiast and if you've been to conferences before, you know that for the most part, they're in like windowless rooms and stuffy hotels. And I've always been kind of confused by that, since astrology is a language for light and earth and season. Doesn't make sense to me why we would be, sitting in chairs in rows without windows, looking at podiums and kind of recreating the binaristic divisions of, people who speak the language of the stars and people who don't, or something like that. And Jason and I are in agreement in that way. And he has assembled a team of, I think, about 20 astrologers who are all really doing amazing work that is about embodiment and experience and experimentation. And I can't wait to be there. This is October 2nd through 5th in 2025. It takes place on Tiwa and Diné lands, otherwise known as Northern New Mexico. And the link for more information is also in the show notes. Phew. All right. So let's get into Pisces season. I'm sharing the chart with you for Pisces season. And this chart is cast for the first moment of Pisces season. This is when the Earth, in its rotation around the sun, starts to cast the light of Pisces across our landscapes. And this chart is cast for Washington, D.C. I could have cast it for where I am on the ancestral homelands of the Multnomah, Clackamas, Chinook, many other tribes and bands of the Pacific Northwest. But I decided to cast it for DC, probably for reasons I don't need to explain. I'm based here in the so-called United States, and it is a weird and wild time right now. And as an American, I am going to probably be reading in ways that continue to reference what's happening in the landscape of the United States right now, politically and socially. But my reading is not going to be focused on the politics at all. So I think wherever you are, you can take some information from this. But I'm going to use this chart just to open up my interpretation for Pisces season. So I'll begin with a chart reading. I'm going to transition from there into talking about some of the specifics that I see coming through for Pisces season, most notably the retrograde and eclipse influences. And then I will talk a little bit about movements between Pisces and Aries. And there are several of these movements happening currently and throughout the year. And that's my plan for this episode. As always, you can find show notes and timestamps in the description below, and I'll say it one last time: take what works, leave the rest, make the meanings that are meaningful for you. All right, so in the chart that I'm sharing with you, and if you're just listening to the audio version, then you can always find this image on our YouTube channel. I think Spotify now also has a video function, so pretty easy to see it. In this particular chart, Pisces is holding the third house, and this is the place of our minds and the information that is coming in to impress our minds and what's happening in the immediate local vicinity and who is in the immediate local vicinity. This is a place where we are giving and receiving information and really attending to what's coming up at present and in the moment. Now, a lot is here. A lot is present. A lot is in this moment. There are a lot of conversations that are happening, and we can see this with the stellium in Pisces. The Sun, Mercury, Saturn, the North Node, and Neptune are all here. Now, the Sun and Mercury are faster moving bodies, but Neptune takes its time, and Neptune has been in Pisces since 2011. And this year, as I've already mentioned, Neptune makes its first ingress into Aries, and that will happen shortly after we get into Aries season on March 30th. Neptune makes its way into Aries. It will only be there for a couple of months. It stations retrograde in July. I misused the word couple. Sorry, my partner always gets on my case about that. They're an editor. They're like, a couple is two. And I'm like, it's some. So I don't know. Neptune will be in Aries for a while in 2025, but it's going to go back into Pisces in October. So end of March until the end of October, we have Neptune's first dip into Aries in almost like 160 years. So this is a significant moment. This is the only time in our lifetimes that any of us are going to be experiencing this transition of Neptune's movement from Pisces into Aries. And this transition will take place over the course of 2 years. Neptune will retrograde again from the beginning of July, re-entering Pisces October 22nd. It will station direct at the very last degree of Pisces December 10th, and then it will move back into Aries for the final time January 27th of 2026, and it will be there until 2039. So we are at the end of an era. Not only are we at the end of a cycle that began in 2011 when Neptune entered Pisces, but we are at the end of a cycle that is now about 150, 160 years in the making, because Pisces is the last sign in the zodiac. And where Neptune is as we move into Pisces season, almost at the last degree, and where Neptune will retrograde back to, which is the last degree or the anaretic degree, is the very last degree of the zodiac. This is really significant. This is literally the description of the end of a story. Now, Neptune is commonly thought of as Pisces' modern ruler. And in astrological schematics, all of the zodiac signs are governed or said to be governed by planetary bodies. Now, in traditional astrology, Pisces is ruled by Jupiter, and we're going to be talking about Jupiter soon and quite a bit. But since the discovery of Neptune, it has been designated as a co-ruler or modern ruler of Pisces. And this is because the influences of Neptune, as they have been observed by astrologers now for over a century, correspond with the influences of Pisces in certain ways. So both the energetics of Neptune as a planetary body in its transiting influence and when we find it in charts, and the energetics of Pisces as an archetypal pattern really bring us to themes like dreams and imagination. Dreams and imagination can be good and bad. We can have nightmares, we can have blissful fantasies. Either way, we're working in realms that are not the realm of solid status quo consensus reality. However, our dreams and our imaginations and our fantasies really shape and color our perception of reality. And you know this, right? You know that, for example, if you're falling in love, everything seems a little bit brighter, a little bit better, and your fantasies and imagination are probably moving towards the future in blissful and happy ways. And even if they are not realistic, even if they might be totally delusional, if that's the thing that you're imagining, then your perception of the world is going to be influenced by those imaginations. And if we are influenced by imaginations or dreams that put us in a positive space, then we are more likely to be meeting our lives and the circumstances of our lives with positivity. And that in and of itself is not inherently a positive thing. So Neptune and Pisces can also be influences that create a kind of separation from reality. We might be so blissed out that we don't see that we're walking in front of traffic, or we might think that something is so great, but we're totally missing red flags and failing to take care of our own needs and boundaries or be discerning or something like that. So when I'm talking about astrology, or thinking about it, I'm always really trying to hold a broad spectrum for possibility and not get too attached to good, bad binaries or ideas of outcomes corresponding with subjective experiences of pleasurable or not pleasurable. Same goes for nightmarish kinds of experiences. If we are really focused on the negative, if we are indulging a lot of fear spaces, the entire world looks like a booby trap, and everybody is going to be somebody to mistrust. So Neptune, in its domicile, considered to be its home in Pisces, and at the very last degree of Pisces, which is a symbol in the zodiac that basically is describing the ways that human beings recreate the stories that we tell ourselves. And when we believe in something, when we believe something to be true, then that's what we create and that's what we become. This is an influence that is asking us to really tune in with what are we believing? What are the stories that we are storying the world with? The myths, the legacies that we are focused on. How are we imagining our potential futures? And in the ways that we use our imaginations to orient us towards action and decision and investment and material manifestation, are we practicing discernment, or are we completely out to lunch? And, I could make a case for all of it, right? And I'm sure that you could too. How we discern what is useful or not useful, or what is real or unreal, will be different moment to moment, day to day, person to person. And therefore, what Neptune and Pisces require of us is subtle awareness. If we're up in our heads about things, if we're only in our imagination about something, anything is possible. The worst is possible, the best is possible. We don't know what's real, and we have no skills in separating fact from fiction or useful from not useful. Subtle awareness brings us into coherence and aligns us with integrity. And subtle awareness is integrity in and of itself. It is the linkage of mind, body, heart, and energy. And when I'm talking about subtle awareness, I'm talking about the capacities that we have to know how we're feeling and to not be convinced that our feelings are real, but also to not be bypassing them, so that we can assess how our feelings are shaping us and maneuvering through us, and potentially pointing our minds and actions and behaviors in certain directions. Feelings are encompassing. They are psychological, somatic, behavioral, and relational, and they happen really fast. And the sensations of emotion that then become physical immediately then link to our minds and mental states. And this is true all the time, but especially with Mercury, the messenger planet, the symbol that describes cognition and perception, also in Pisces, as we move into the season and returning to Pisces in its retrograde over the next months, really asks us to do the work of getting to know our feelings and taking responsibility for them. So I gave you meditations to tune in with your felt sense and internal integration and coherence, in part because these meditations are really designed to get you working skillfully with your feelings. Now, nobody needs astrology to look out into the world right now and see how quickly and profoundly and devastatingly feelings can hijack people's common sense and response abilities. Feelings, especially when they are intense and especially when they anchor us in our primal motivations and instincts to move away from pain and towards pleasure. This is biological programming. So when we have feelings coming up that basically tell us that pain or pleasure is nearby and we could move towards one or the other, those feelings will induce hormonal responses in our bodies, and our minds will immediately move into action telling us stories about them. So for example, if you get the news that there is economic instability in the world and oh my God, that might mean danger and scarcity for you, it makes sense that quite quickly your body might go into a survival response. That means increased levels of cortisol and stress hormones, adrenaline moving through your body. That means plummeting levels of the good feeling hormones like dopamine and serotonin. That means that your mind then is more likely to begin to cycle on fear fantasies, and then you are more likely to take actions and make decisions that create confirmation bias, right? So this is why when people are stressed out, they doom scroll. You're looking for confirmation that the thing that you're scared of is indeed happening. And that can create paralysis. We get information that there's a reward somewhere nearby, that if we go over there, then we're going to get the thing that we want. And our attention gets completely pulled in the direction of possible reward fulfillment. And hormones start to surge through our bodies that create states of excitement and arousal and anticipation. And our minds start to spiral on the fantasies of how great it's going to be when whatever it is that we're so excited about happening is finally happening. And then we are living in the future, and we might not see that just in front of us is an actual pitfall. So Neptune is present and at a very strong degree in Pisces as we move into Pisces season, and it is conjunct within a degree of the North Node. The North Node is one of the eclipse points. The North and South Node are the ascending and descending points of the moon's orbit around the Earth. And we are moving into eclipse season. So we're going to have the first eclipse of 2025 on March 13th. And the proximity here of the sun to the North Node is part of how we can see that in the astrological chart. Now, the North Node represents a compulsive evolutionary direction, and it's often depicted as the mouth of the dragon or the mouth of the serpent eating its own tail. In Vedic astrology, the nodes are both considered to be malefic in that they are bringing energies that are wily and mischievous and sometimes quite destructive. the North Node especially can be a ravenous kind of energy and really compelling in the force field that it produces. And this is highlighting everything that I just said about the power of our minds and imaginations. So here's astrology telling you what you already know, that this is a period of time on Earth when people's imaginations are running wild. There is a lot of intentional hijacking of our mental attention and focus, and therefore of our endocrine systems, and therefore of our behaviors. The current administration in the United States has been absolutely open and explicit about their intentions to keep people in a state of trauma. They are utilizing playbooks that basically are about overwhelming our consciousness with so much information that feels so absurd and outlandish and overwhelming all at once that it's actually impossible to pay attention to anything or to feel like we can affect anywhere. And this then produces a state of overwhelm and disassociation. Overwhelm and disassociation are two key words for Pisces as an energy, and definitely those key words would be emphasized by Neptune and the North Node in Pisces. So what I want to say is that part of how we can work skillfully with our lives right now and how astrology can help us do that is by recognizing that the water that we're swimming in is full of all kinds of stuff. And the waters of our oceans on Earth right now are full of all kinds of pollution. The atmosphere, the general environment that we are alive inside of has so much stuff in it that hasn't been processed, that hasn't been dealt with, that at this point has reached a climax of overwhelm. And if we want to be effective at all in any kinds of ways, in our own lives, in relationship with the ones that we care about most, or in ways that might be bigger than us, then we have got to take as much responsibility as possible for our imaginations and therefore our energetic states and mental, emotional, and physical states of consciousness. Now, Saturn is here in Pisces as well. And Saturn is not as slow moving as Neptune is, but it does take its time to move through a sign. It has a 30-year orbit. So the last time that it was in Pisces was in the mid-90s. And it has been in Pisces in its current transit since March of 2023. Saturn moves faster than Neptune, so Saturn is moving towards a conjunction with Neptune. In the chart that I'm sharing with you, they are already within 10 degrees of an orb of influence. And in 2025, the proximity between them is going to increase to the point of like almost conjunct. I think they're going to be within like 1 or 2 degrees of each other for several months in the middle of the year. They don't technically achieve their partile or exact conjunction until next year. And that happens in February of 2026, and they will form their exact conjunction at the very first degree of Aries. This is a degree point I'm going to definitely be talking more about shortly, but what I'm going to say for right now is that the very first degree of Aries is the very first degree of the zodiac. So I have been talking about the last degrees of the zodiac, and this place where there's an energetic overwhelm and accumulation of all kinds of things. and a place where we are brought into the symbolism of the stories that have been passed down and handed down that then we become creations of. But the first degree of Aries is represented by new life coming forward, by an emergence of a new type of being into the world and a fresh start. 2025 and the astrology of the 2020s in general has a lot of themes in it that have to do with something new beginning. And what is actually new? The hovering of Neptune and the North Node in the last degrees of Pisces reminds us that history does have a way of repeating itself. And energy can transition from one state into another. And transition is not the same as true transformation. So what is actually new? Is it new that a new group of power-hungry men are trying to control everybody else? Not really. It's kind of the same old that's been happening for a real long time. It's just a new look. It's like new, like new outfits, new ways of doing it maybe, but it's not really new. What is truly new? Now, this is a question that I'm asking myself quite a lot, and I have some ideas about it. And one idea that I have is that what is truly new is the moment that we are in. We are in a moment of total catastrophe and breakdown. We're in a moment that some people call the Anthropocene or the Necrocene, when human impact on planet Earth has tipped the scales of the Earth's ecosystems to a point where human survival is being severely threatened. Now, when I say human impact, I do not mean all humans. I mean particular groups of humans and particular orientations within human consciousness that is about self-fulfillment at the cost of collective well-being. Greed, hoarding, extraction, enslavement, rape and pillage mindsets, savior mindsets, winner-loser mindsets, these kinds of orientations that lead people and groups of people towards supremacy delusions, that they are somehow better than others, and therefore they're going to indulge us-them fantasies and position themselves somehow apart from others who are very much part of the same thing that everybody's a part of, because here we are on Earth, literally sharing the air. These kinds of mindsets have brought us to a certain place, and human consciousness has never really been in this place before. Though there have been apocalypses that have happened for a long time, and many groups of people have experienced the destruction of their homelands, their cultures, their belief systems, etc., it is really the first time that as a global people, we have to confront something all together. And it is the first time that we are in a position also of having technologies that allow us to share information and to do so in mass. And I know that there's all kinds of problems with technology. Not everybody has access. The technologies themselves are extractive. They are also highly susceptible to manipulation. The information that can be shared can be weaponized against us, etc. And there's something that's happening because of these technologies that have completely disrupted the social field by allowing us to share and receive information quite rapidly that are changing human consciousness. The last thing that feels quite new to me is that I think, and this is an opinion, there's no way that I have to really prove this, but I think that we are living in a time when many groups of people have experienced very profound traumas and have had some kind of time and space and perspective available to get an analysis of the trauma that we've come from, to understand ourselves as survivors of trauma. And that's not to say that trauma isn't ongoing or that we're not continuously traumatizing each other. But there is a kind of common language that is emerging around a trauma-informed sensibility. And while many communities and individuals have maybe had these kinds of perspectives for a very long time and have understood the severing, I'm going to say, of mind, body, heart, or the kind of hijacking of the soul and spirit that trauma can produce, the generations that are coming of age now and that are coming into power now are generations that have received inheritances of trauma work. And many of us have gone to therapy. Many of us have somehow encountered ideas about where we come from and where our people come from that are starting to dislodge the stories that we have that really center us in particular social locations and identities that feel very fixed. Many of us are having understandings and awarenesses of overlapping timelines and ancestral time that unite us together in ways that feel much more fluid than boxed in. And I think this is new. Again, this is a feeling. This is an opinion. Take it or leave it. But I think that there's a new kind of human consciousness that is emerging right now, and that the overwhelm and the chaos of the moment and the thickness, I'm going to say the gross, and by this I mean the most superficial layers of the old stories that are becoming so obscene, so absurd, so everywhere, they are emerging and strengthening in their power because they are ending. And this is the end of an era. Now, I don't know what we are moving into, if we will transition into another cycle that allows these seeds of supremacy and dominion to continue to manifest in new and different ways all over again, or if something is happening that will really allow for transformation. Of course, my personal preference and hope and everything that I'm committed to in this lifetime is going for the latter. And so that's where I'm going to come from in this reading. And I'm going to say that I think that the chaos of the moment is a creative and fertile chaos. And there are signs and symbols in this chart that are numerous that definitely speak to a resurgence of a kind of totalitarianism, nationalism, populism, racism, sexism, waves of the conquering dominion type of vibes that we have seen for a long time. We can think about, the Nazis and Hitler and all kinds of, the Inquisition, right? Religious wars, the kinds of terrorism that we see around the world, rooted in fundamentalism and intolerance of difference. And that is a really strong theme right now. And the pile up of energy in Pisces and the movement between Pisces and Aries and the retrogrades definitely all are carrying these symbols. There's a lot of xenophobia. There's a lot of fear of the other. There's a lot of fatigue and frustration with, in certain groups of people, I'll say, like, who, don't want to be told anymore that they need to consider the needs or the rights of others, and they really want to paint a picture of homogeneity with them at the epicenter of normalcy or something like that. But that is unsustainable on planet Earth. The planet that we live on is a planet of biodiversity. The creative intelligence of planet Earth is wily and mischievous and adaptable. And we see this again and again and again in natural systems. Human beings don't know how the fuck it works. And scientists love them, don't actually know it. There is a mysterious principle inside of life that is not meant for us to hack it and figure out how to play God. We live inside of, we are part of an organism that always adapts and modifies itself through multiplication, regeneration, and iterative adaptation. And this is why there are diversities in the evolution of species across landscapes. This is why when a highway gets built through a forest, the same genus of birds becomes two distinct species. This is how microorganisms and bacteria end up growing into new forms. Life on Earth cannot be controlled. It cannot be flattened into a homogeneous sameness. And Pisces as an energy likes to do that, but it also includes everything that's different inside of it. Okay, so Saturn. Saturn has been in Pisces since 2023, and over the course of the next year, Saturn is moving into conjunction with Neptune. Now, Neptune and Pisces, as I was just talking about, have this way of overwhelming us, and in the overwhelm, everything kind of dissolves into the same thing. We have trouble focusing, we have trouble parsing out one thing from the other, trouble discerning what's real, what's not real, what's useful, what's not useful. Saturn is a very different kind of energy. Now, two hands together in a deep bow to Sherry Taylor for teaching us all about Saturn in its mythic origins, pointing us back to the creator of life itself and civilization on Earth. Western astrology has its own kind of history that follows histories of colonization. And when we track it back through the Greeks, through the Persians, through the Golden Age of Islam, through Jewish and Chaldean priests, and we go back to the cradle of civilization, back to ancient Sumer and Mesopotamia, Saturn's myth connects us with the genderless god Enki. Now, Enki is a trickster and a jokester. Enki is a erotic, creative artisan who spends his nights in the Abzu, in the ocean of formlessness and chaos, and then swims to shore during the day where he molds civilization from clay and brings into being the multiplicities of life on Earth. And in the myths that surround him, which there are many, and I definitely don't know them all. But some of the ones that I've heard have to do with Enki's kind of divine siblings, other pantheons within this cosmology, not really liking what Enki's up to. They're like, why humans? You know, I don't know. Maybe you've had the same question. I know I have. I'm like, but really? But Enki has such a deep love for human beings, and some of Enki's divine siblings like to play tricks. These are kind of malevolent tricks. They cast spells upon the humans. They inflict injuries and insults upon them, and they try to thwart the perfection that Enki is crafting. But Enki will not be dissuaded. And in one of the first teachings of disability justice, Enki has a job for everyone. And those who have disabilities, injuries, incompletions of some kind, maybe they're missing something that goes in the, factory model, they get special roles inside of humanity. They have special perspectives. When something is missing, that actually brings about a deeper sensitivity and awareness of what is needed. Enki has a job for everyone, and everyone has a place. Now, in the study of the ages, and if you think about, the age of Aquarius that we might be entering into, this was the golden age, and this was the age of balance on Earth when there was plenty, was under Enki's rulership. Saturn, in its mythologies, has evolved. It has gone through various shapes and manifestations. Like all of the myths of the Greek pantheon, it was consumed and subsumed by a colonizing culture. And Saturn became a myth that corresponds with Kronos and the god of time. But Saturn's symbol has always connected us with time. And Sherry talks about how Saturn is the guardian of the birth chart itself. And some of you may have come across themes of planetary harmonics and the spheres of incarnation that talk about how to incarnate into a body on Earth is a, first of all, very special opportunity, and second of all, not easy, because we have to go through the gate of Saturn to come into form. To be ensouled and embodied is an deeply challenging kind of experience and initiation to go through. And the entire time that we are here, encapsulated and contained in these flesh suits, it's a challenge. We have to deal with gravity. We have to deal with aging, illness, limitations, restrictions, obscurations, obstructions, etc. And these are the domains of Saturn. But when we're working with Saturn, we also are working with our own power of manifestation. To bring something into form isn't easy. And you know this if you've ever tried to build anything at all. It requires labor and diligence and iteration and repetition. So that is what the earth realm is about. Do it again, do it again, do it again, do it again. At some point, you will become proficient and practiced, and then you will have skill. Saturn is not about becoming deluded by imagination, whether it is pleasurable, blissful imagination or fear-based neuroses. Saturn asks us to get grounded and be realistic about what is actually happening. And one of the quickest ways to do that is to come into the body. This is the technique of so many meditation practices. Focus on your breath. What is happening right now in this instant? Chances are good that in this particular instant, if you really bring your awareness into it, there's actually a lot of quiet. And inside the quiet and inside the awareness of your own breath is spaciousness. Now, space is one of the preconditions for happiness to emerge. And I'm not talking about euphoria. I'm not talking about the kind of happiness that, has gumdrops raining down and rainbows everywhere or something like that. I'm talking about contentment and the kind of happiness that we can center in ourselves, whether or not we are also suffering and struggling. And this is the kind of happiness that can see beauty, that can see what is valuable and worthy of appreciation in any given moment, and that doesn't need to ravenously devour everything in its path. Space, the space of your breath, the space of your boundaries, the space that you hold around your capacity to center in any given moment is a precondition for happiness. And though Saturn can certainly imply restriction and limitation and challenge and the gravity and hardship of being alive on Earth, and certainly there are so many of those kinds of feelings and realities present right now, there is also space. And when we practice creating space and centering in space, we have access to responsibility. And responsibility is one of Saturn's keywords. And though Neptune and the North Node in Pisces are increasing delusion and unreality and kind of fantasy realms, they are also increasing the potential of productive imagination. And what we focus on will grow. And that's not magical speaking, that's reality. If you focus on something every single day, over many, many days, whatever it is that you're focusing on will grow. I said a while ago that 2 years into doing somatic space practices every single week has changed my life. And it's because it's a focus. So every single week, if I tune in with practices that help me align astrologically, that get me kind of thinking and feeling and being with the ways that I want to make the meaning that's meaningful for me and tune in with the highest benefit for all involved in these astral energies, that practice then strengthens my body-mind over time. Saturn as an energetic influence asks for discipline. That means discipleship. It is not a guarantee that your most fantastic outcome is just around the corner. It is not promising that everything you dream of you can have. Saturn is saying that if you focus consistently in a devotional way, something will happen and there will be an outcome of that focus. And another way to say that is consequence. And a consequence can be a good or bad thing. So as we move into Pisces season and the sun bringing energy and vitality and aliveness, and Mercury bringing mental awareness and cognition and perception, are moving into alignment with Saturn in the North Node and Neptune, we are living in an age of fantasy and illusion and delusion. We are living in a world where there are sorcerers and magicians casting spells on us through the stories that they are telling, through the ways that they manipulate words and images. And the spells that they are casting upon us are spells that would have us really amplifying otherness and homogeneity. These are spells that are meant to make us mistrust anyone who is different than us. These are spells that are also meant to make us think that somehow we can find safety in sameness. These are spells that decrease our subtle awareness and capacity to tune in with subtle frequencies in our bodies, in our relationships, and here on Earth. And these are spells that can also be broken. And how do we break these spells? How do we organize ourselves around the powers of our imagination? And how do we work together in this field of commonality? We are all alive on planet Earth. We are part of the same thing. But inside of this sameness, there is so much difference. And that is the key to thriving, abundant life on Earth. Biodiversity is the key. We need everybody to be unabashedly, courageously, and joyfully themselves in a totally unique way. And when we are unabashedly, courageously, creatively ourselves, we are actually much more similar than different. Most people want to enjoy their one and only precious lifetimes. Most of us appreciate beauty. We want to laugh. We want to experience the benefits and opportunities of this life. And I think many people are really content to keep it simple. The voracious greed and hoarding spell that has been cast upon our psyche and the kind of cultural moment is something that a lot of people, I think, when they tune in with their subtle awareness, know that it's not for them and it's not so good for them. But if they are not connected to their subtle intelligences, then they will get hijacked by it. Hoarding and greed comes from a deep space of insecurity and disconnection. So this is the mind. This is the consciousness. This is the third house as we enter into Pisces season. Now, immediately as we move into Pisces season, Mercury is forming a square with Jupiter in Gemini. And Jupiter has recently stationed direct in Gemini, and it will be moving into Cancer by June of this year. Now, Jupiter is the traditional ruling planet of Pisces, and I read traditional rulerships as well as modern rulerships. So I will say that Jupiter's presence in Gemini also has a lot to do with what's happening in Pisces right now. And in some ways, Jupiter's symbol in Gemini could describe everything that I was just talking about with all these other placements in Pisces, because Jupiter expands and brings more of, and sometimes it also brings an overwhelm. In the abundance and expansion that it brings, there are opportunities for growth, but there are also warnings about excess. Gemini is the natural correspondent of the third house as the third sign, and therefore it has a lot to do with our mental states, our cognition, our perception, our speech, the giving and receiving exchange of information. It is a sign of commerce and exchange in general. And like all the air signs, Gemini really speaks to the social landscapes and the ways that we are teaching each other all the time and learning from each other all the time by how we transmit information and the meanings that we are making. In this particular chart, Gemini is in the 6th house, and Jupiter in that place describes another kind of overwhelm. So stellium in Pisces in the 3rd house, Jupiter and Gemini in the 6th house, square between Mercury and Jupiter. This is a season of mental overwhelm. No doubt about it. There is so much happening on the information level, And therefore, we have to do the 6th house Gemini work of it all, which is practice discernment, filter. What is actually real? What's useful? What's important? What do you need to be focusing on? In the show notes, I will include some resources for newsletters and Substacks of independent journalists who I have been tuning in with. Some of you may know I broke up with Meta. Embodied Astrology is no longer giving our time and creative energy and mental attention to Mark Zuckerberg. And our platform is still there. I use the platform to a certain extent, but that's not where I'm spending a lot of time right now. And I'm doing that because I needed to filter. I needed some discernment. That algorithm is actually meant to addict us. It is meant to put us into states of mental overwhelm and emotional collapse. And it is definitely meant to get people to buy things. And Mark Zuckerberg has politics that I don't agree with. So I stopped paying for our verified check. If you follow us on Instagram, don't get scammed by accounts wishing that they were us. Do follow us on Blue Sky, and more importantly, become a member. Just tune in with us where we actually are. Social media is not where we are for the most part. We are holding communal gathering spaces and doing the work of being together. And that is one of the best ways to be in discernment around information these days. Have face-to-face conversations with people. Put yourself out there. And this is definitely a Jupiter in Gemini kind of vibe. Put yourself out there to have conversations about difference. As I'll talk about in a moment with the retrogrades, this is definitely a period of time when a lot of us are needing to up-level our skills with conflict. And we have to learn how to disagree with one another without canceling each other, without annihilating each other, without needing to punish each other for being different or having views that we don't agree with. There need to be ways that we can enter into the generative potentials of conflict. And some of the generative potentials have to do with there are growth opportunities when we embrace difference. Immediately after the election, I started tuning in with news sources that were not left news sources. I really tried to listen and to pay attention to what people were talking about who voted for Trump. And while there's a lot of what I expected there in terms of, far right kind of fascist vibes and like tech bro vibes, overwhelmingly what I was connecting with and hearing were sentiments that I actually really agreed with. The Democratic Party wasn't doing enough to shift the situation for the people. It wasn't doing enough to end genocide. There wasn't enough tangible action that was leading to what actually felt like the changes that needed to happen. And people are concerned about things that politicians are not talking about. And a lot of people just wanted change. And I can appreciate that. It feels more productive to me to open my mind to difference than it does to close the door on it. And that doesn't mean that I have to accept every opinion that I don't agree with. It doesn't mean that I have to be nice to people all the time. Niceness and kindness are actually very, very different. And blanket niceness decreases intimacy, while courageous kindness and the willingness to actually stand up for something and disagree or have an argument about it while respecting the dignity of another human being, that feels more generative to me. Clearly, there's all kinds of circumstances out there, and a lot of folks are not available to have any kind of generative conversation at all. But I think a lot of folks, and I'm going to say especially on the left, because that's my audience for the most part, A lot of us have made blanket assumptions about people, and it is not serving us. It is not helping us to actually come together. And we do this to each other. Every time I get on Instagram, and this is part of why I have left, I see people on the left tearing each other to shreds. I see people criticizing each other. They didn't do it right. It should have been like this. They're not blah, 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 blah. It drives me nuts. People are different. Every one of us is going to come at this a different way. And there are a lot of symbols astrologically right now that I've been reading that have to do with the need to open up to the diversity of it all. Everyone has a role in the revolution, and everyone's role is different. We need people who are going to be artists, and we need different kinds of art. We need people who are going to be on the front lines, and we need different kinds of frontline activists. We need people who are going to be healers, and there are so many different ways that healing has to happen. When we are focusing on what's wrong, rather than how we are in service to the same thing, we are doing a disservice to the aims that we're trying to get further on. And the eclipses that we're coming up on, the North Node in Pisces, the South Node in Virgo, to me really speak to this. They speak to the ways that we have to get less critical of each other and more conscious and discerning about the power of critique. It is important and effective and helpful to be able to see how a system works. But when we pigeonhole people as the system, and we say all men or all white people or all cis people or all people who work for that corporation are the system, they are the problem, we've lost them all and we've lost our connection with them. So how can we do the work of subtle discernment, being responsible for our own feelings about things? And I'm saying this, and I want to say that I am in the work of it actively in my life these days, and it's not easy. When I feel activated by people who have really different opinions and styles and ways of being, I am practicing slowing down, trying to quiet my mind and create some space in the moment so that I can attend to the ways that feelings flood my body. When I feel threatened, when I feel outraged, when I feel in shock and disbelief at what I'm perceiving as the lack of moral intelligence in others, I actually really need to check myself. Because immediately what happens in my body-mind is stress hormones flood me. And I orient in a way that is about pushing away what I disagree with, pushing against what I feel aversion towards, and identifying in myself with what I think is right. And this then makes a fascist out of me. This puts me into a position where I am a lot more likely to be arrogant, to be ignorant, to be harmful, to speak in ways that don't further the conversation. This puts me in a position where I start othering other people. And that's different than using meditative techniques to get myself into a space of peace and inner calm where we are all one and I don't have a problem and I can be nice here. That's also not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about spiritual bypassing. I'm not talking about biohacking our own bodies so that we can maintain some kind of sense of stability as the world is falling apart around us, or that we can disassociate from the harms that are actually happening. Those are extremes of what the current eclipse axis, I think, is talking about. So I'm interested in how do we build our intelligence in our body minds, in our integrity, our integration, mind, heart, body, energy, so that we can actually do the work of generative conflict and community building. Community is a buzzword these days. Jupiter in Gemini wants us to increase community, and community is hard. People are maddening. People will drive you nuts. Peopling is one of the most frustrating things about living on planet Earth, if not the most frustrating thing. Oh my gosh, people, what the fuck is going on with people? In many Buddhist frameworks, you'll hear people talking about the three jewels of a Buddhist practice. So there's the Buddha, the pure intelligence of beingness, right? The wisdom of sentience. There's the Dharma, which is the work and it's the practice. And okay, we keep showing up and let's do it every day so that we can strengthen. And then there's the Sangha, each other, the group, the people who we are practicing with. And I've heard teachers describe Sangha as a bag of jagged rocks being jostled together until they become smooth. And I think that this is a really great metaphor and description of what community actually is. It's kind of a brutal process of being shoved against each other on all sides, and our jagged edges and our harsh edges and the places where we are unconscious and ill-equipped and too much and not enough and all of that have to just smooth each other down over time. And when we do that work with dedication and consistency, and when we do it in ways that really take up the path of practice, and in our path or on our path of practice, what we're focusing on and attending to is consciousness, sentience, subtle awareness, then over time we become really adept and our relationships make us all stronger. And so the last thing I'll say for now about Jupiter in Gemini and the stellium in Pisces, and I will also give a nod to Pluto in Aquarius in the second house, is that we need each other right now, and we need each other more than ever. The myths of capitalism are crumbling. We are moving rapidly into a post-capitalist reality, and that might mean a couple of oligarchs who are beyond billionaires while the majority of the people are destitute and struggling. But it could also mean toppling power because we refuse to believe in that kind of wealth anymore. We need each other so much right now. We need each other to reach out, to extend, to offer what we can. If somebody is sick, go bring them some soup. If somebody is struggling financially, share some money. If somebody is freaking out because they've lost their job or there's housing instability, how do we group together to help take care of one another? Now, communities who have been marginalized have been doing this forever. And communities who have been able to exist in a kind of bubble of safety and security inside of capitalism are being threatened right now for the first time. A lot of us, I'll put myself in that category too, as a white American who has experienced class mobility in my lifetime. The threat that I see happening for people like me and my peers, and that might be you who are listening. If you for the first time ever in like 2016 started to feel scared, and this year that fear factor is turning up and you're like, oh my God, what's going to happen? If this is the first time that you're really feeling a threat, I'm going to say it's a good thing. We need more of us to wake up. we need the groups of people who have been comfortable enough to stay complacent to wake up and to start doing something different. And a lot of us are. And there's a lot of activation and mobilization right now. And this is going to bring me into the retrogrades, but I will say that Jupiter in Gemini is squaring Saturn in Pisces. Jupiter and Saturn have been in a square since the middle of 2024. And this square has a couple of exact transits. In 2024, there were two, one in August and one in December, with Jupiter in Gemini and Saturn in Pisces. But this year, in 2025, Jupiter will ingress Cancer and Saturn will move into Aries, and they will square for the third and final time in June. We get that on June 14th. And they are at the very first degrees of their respective signs. And this is the opening square in a 20-year cycle that began in 2020 on the solstice, December 21st of 2020. Jupiter and Saturn came into alignment. They formed a conjunction basically where Pluto is right now, pretty much the first degree of Aquarius. And that started a 20-year cycle of growth. Now, Jupiter and Saturn are considered to be the timekeepers of society. Saturn, I already talked about, building civilization, bringing it into form. Jupiter, our ethics, our morals, our beliefs, our concepts of what we could possibly be and become. Our trends, the cultural trends that are emerging. So in 2020, a new 20-year cycle began, and that was a period of great social unrest and a lot of pushing for new systems and transformation of systems. There was righteous outrage at that time because of what the pandemic was presenting us with, laying bare the structural inequalities that result in brutal marginalization for many groups of people, huge income and wealth gaps, a world that is not set up to take care of us in our health and bodies and needs. We're at the opening square of that cycle now, and squares are meant to be challenging. What have you done since 2020? How have you mobilized? What have you learned? How have you changed? And how are you feeling challenged now by the situation? And when you think back to what was happening for you in 2020, and I'm going to say that those two coming together at the first degree of Aquarius is definitely a symbol of radicalization on a mass level. When you think back to that time, how have you progressed since then? Now, I know in my own life that a lot has happened in the last 5 years. And when I think about it in that context, I actually have a lot to be proud of. And it's important for me to hold it in the context because we are only 1/4 into the cycle. We are not halfway through yet. We are definitely not all the way through yet. We are at a crisis point and a pivot point. What are we going to do with that energy? Now, currently, we see a lot of things being torn down. And what is being torn down, it might seem to a lot of us that it's spelling out even more of the bad news that we were all so upset about then. Increased policing, increased state violence, expansion of the prison system, coordination between genocidal governments and local police forces, dissolving of scientific research and health research and the CDC, probable, proliferation of mass contagion, dissolving of social services, whether that's education, housing, protections for women, for trans people, for old people, for young people, for the earth, for the environment. Wow. And the perspective that I am holding for myself, because what you focus on grows, is that many of those systems that had been put together in ways that never achieved actually what they needed to achieve, many of those systems were not what they could be, which isn't to say that we don't need them. It's not to say we don't need scientific research or education or protection for trans people, queer people, women, old people, young people, the earth. We do. We need all of that. But we need it different than it was. And we need it more than it was. And we need it in ways that are actually more integrated and more grounded in the real reason around why we need them. Now, I don't have all of this information available in my mind right now, but some of you will know it and you can look it up if you want to. An example of this is Roe v. Wade, right to abortion. That legislation was built on a premise that wasn't actually about protecting birthing people's right to choose. It was built on a right to privacy or something like that. I believe it's something similar with gay marriage. And this is where, I'm sorry, I'm not a politician. I don't have all this kind of information in my mind. But a lot of the civil rights legislation was co-opted, right? It was watered down. Legislation got put in place that just transitioned, right? I'm not talking about an actual transformation. So from the post-Reconstruction through Jim Crow into the 1980s war on drugs, mass systems of incarceration and enslavement of Black and brown people and poor people in the United States expanded. They didn't go away. Enslavement never stopped. It just took on a different form. Now we have the largest prison system on earth, where incarcerated people are forced to work extremely dangerous jobs like fighting fires. They're not paid, right? They're forced to labor for corporations who pay them pennies a day while the prisons charge them way over market rate to make a phone call or buy a toothbrush or something like that. So yes, things feel really scary right now, and they are. And we are in a moment of profound crisis and threat. And there are groups of people mobilizing to continue systems of domination and supremacy and wipe out protections for the diversity of the earth and living beings on earth. And we need to counter that. But how we want to counter that right now is by really focusing on what it is that we want, not what we are losing and not what has been lost. And yes, we need grief circles. Yes, we need space to know what we have lost and to mourn it so that we can understand what it is that we need. But if we're focused on fear and we're focused on survival tactics, then we are not focused on creating and generating what can actually transform and create something new. Okay, I could go on. I want to try and keep this podcast episode under 2 hours. So I am going to shift now and try and talk to you a little bit about these retrogrades that are coming up in Pisces season. So as we move into the season, Mars is retrograde, and Mars has been retrograde since December 6th. It stations retrograde at 6 degrees of Leo. And in the first week of Pisces season on February 23rd, Mars stations direct, yay, at 17 degrees of Cancer. So Mars is the planet that goes retrograde least frequently. And that means that when Mars does go retrograde, it really can catch us off guard because all the other planets have a retrograde cycle that's fairly rhythmic. And even though it might, throw us off our game a little bit here or there, Mars retrogrades really tend to like be intense to be working with. So definitely tune in with your 2025 overviews. I will, if you pay for the full reading, those are like 3 hours long. You'll get so much information on what Mars retrograde is doing in the charts for your sun, moon, and rising signs. If you just tune in with the overviews that I shared last month, you won't get the didactic information, but you will get the general themes. Now, in a collective reading, I'm going to say that Mars is retrograding through the most personal signs of the zodiac. Cancer and Leo are signs that symbolize the very centers of our bodies. Where Mars stationed retrograde in Leo is the place in the body that governs the heart and the spine. Leo as an energy is about actualization of life as it manifests in individual forms. We all have Leo in our charts. We all have a fifth house. Leo is ruled by the sun. Everybody is given life by the sun, and everybody has a heart at the center of their chest, and that heart is beating, and when it stops beating, you go bye-bye. So Leo is about the potential of expressing life force. Cancer in our bodies rules the chest and breast area. It rules the stomach, and it co-rules the womb with Scorpio. These are places that are life-giving and nourishing. These are places that we gather close around and that hold and protect and contain what we need in order to sustain and survive. Mars is a symbol, in my opinion, of action potential. And astrologers will talk about Mars being related to conflict and violence and war. And yeah, you know, that's action potential. But action potential gets you out of bed in the morning. It is your orientation to doing anything at all. And action potential is another way of talking about our biologic organization and impulses when it comes to like our primal reflexes. And as I already talked about, we are wired to move towards pleasure and away from pain. Attraction and aversion are our fundamental directives as life forms. And part of what maybe we can work with, especially if we have meditation practices, is becoming discerning around attraction and aversion and what compels and propels us. Because a lot of times our perceptions of pleasure and pain are faulty and will get us into trouble and will definitely lead us to making a mess out of things. And this is why I think Mars so often gets equated with conflict and violence and war, because people respond primitively. People in general, as a big general we, have not evolved enough to the point where we can work with any kind of regular intelligence and discernment around our attractions and aversions. Now, Mars also relates with what we might call masculinity and men. And I include all people when I'm talking about masculinity and anyone who identifies as a man. In our world, masculinity is a construct, right? It is a cliche, it's a stereotype. Every culture will have its own iteration of masculinity, but in general, if we're going to paint a big picture across the world right now, we are living in a time when masculinity has been kind of imbued with a kind of supremacy and dominion over femininity. And all across the world, you see men in positions of power, and you see masculinized behavior exerting supremacy and dominion over more feminine ways of being. And feminine ways of being include nurturing and caretaking family and land, and caring for the emotions and the felt sense and interiority. Whereas more masculine ways of being, or we might employ the language of like yin and yang, or projecting and receiving. I don't know what the kids are calling it these days, but there are ways of moving out into the world and asserting force. And asserting force is not inherently good or bad. It is not inherently productive or destructive. But when we are asserting force in excess of being receptive and relational and tending and caring for life, then we get a pretty significant imbalance. And reading astrology, one of the ways to tune in with Mars is to tune in with projecting, asserting, yang, or masculine kinds of energy. And this is action potential. It's what we take action for, what we're going to fight for, what we're going to mobilize for, what actually gets us out of bed and into action. Mars stationed retrograde in Leo and moved back into Cancer. Mars in Leo wants to take action for big, bold, self-expressive, self-enlargement, heart enlargement. Mars in Leo can be an incredibly creative, vivacious, charismatic, courageous kind of energy. And it can also be brash and bold and totally arrogant and completely obsessed with itself. Mars in Cancer, action potential around nurturing and caring and protecting and defending can manifest as people really taking action for what is most vulnerable, working together to protect the most fragile beings inside of life's ecosystems. And Mars in Cancer can also manifest as hypersensitivity, hyper-emotionality, and a quickness to respond with force or with militancy when any kind of fragility might be threatened. So here we are in a moment when, at least here in the landscape of the United States, there are really interesting and intense gender binary politics being played out. We've got strong men kinds of leaders exerting their strength or trying to convince us all that they are the strongest, the biggest, the baddest. We have groups of people who identify as women and who are very convinced that the only people who get to identify as women are people who have been born with uteruses and ovaries. There is an assault on intersex people who actually exist. There are literally more than two sexes possible in human biologies. And there is an assault on people who feel themselves outside of the constructed gender binary of a masculine supremacy kind of world that would position men as superior to women and women basically as, producers of babies and caretakers of homes and things like that only. So part of how I'm reading this Mars retrograde is the increasing emphasis on gender and gender divisiveness and the wars gender wars or wars on, gender ideology, like the administration is calling it right now. And inside of this, also an amplification of division between projecting, asserting more masculine aggression force and receptive, relating, nurturing, caretaking forces. And inside of these divisions, the constructs of gender are really being lifted up into a kind of public consciousness. But all people, regardless of their genitals and hormones, of course, have capacities to be assertive, be projecting, be warrior-like, and to be nurturing and protecting and relatable and tending to life. And another way to think about Mars in Cancer is as protection and defense around the us. So Cancer wants to contain and bond and create family. And some of the symbolism surrounding Cancer as an energetic archetype, you might be familiar with, like a shell or a womb or a fence around a garden or something like that. And so the Cancerian energetic, when it is filled with a martial kind of impulse, can be really sensitive about us and them issues and highly activated to protect how the us is conceived of in defense against the them that might be a threat to the us. Now, this is happening everywhere, right? So communities that I'm a part of, trans people, queer people, and femmes largely are like, oh my God, we need to protect us because those guys are out to get us. Those guys are also feeling that way. They feel they need to protect them because, their position as better than everybody else and needing to be in charge and totally not accountable to any kind of harm that they might do, that's being threatened by woke ideology. And oh no, what happens if white men are no longer beyond reproach and in charge of everything? They are scared that means that they're going to die. And it's an existential fear right now. Of course, they're going to die, but it is a deeply existential fear. Many of us don't want to separate ourselves anymore. And I'm going to include me inside of this us, and maybe you want to also. And this is happening, though, in many different ways. So I think a lot of people are really tired of the way that people are dividing ourselves. And this might be coming up in frustration around like DEI as an example, but this might also be coming up in frustration around the dismantling of DEI, for example. And there are a lot of people feeling frustrated by the ways that groups of people are constantly pitted against one another. And some people are saying, we need more recognition. Stop being at war with us. Give us language. Give us access. And other people are saying, this language is divisive and these programs are not actually equitable. And there's a lot of people in very different ways feeling frustrated with the us and them narratives. Now, I'm even having trouble articulating this in this moment because I don't want to step on anybody's toes and I don't want you to turn against me as you hear this. But can you hear that astrology, in the way that I relate with it, which is through my own bias, totally, but also it's not here for us to get what we want out of it, right? Like we can't read astrology through the lens of our own preferences purely. Like if I look at this astrology and I'm like, yeah, this is definitely the time for progressive wins because of this, this, and this. But I'm not willing to say, this could be a time of totalitarian takeover in World War III. Then I'm kind of not doing a very good job as an astrologer because all of that is here. And the themes that are here can be the same across the board for groups of people who are totally different and feeling it really differently. So the feeling of frustration between us and them, and this feeling of needing to protect and defend what feels personal and fragile and sensitive is happening for everybody. But it's happening in different ways, and it's happening according to people's social locations and preferences and biases and how they've been educated or not. And in my opinion, this is a really powerful time to disrupt us and them narratives a little bit and to agitate them and to try and figure out where they break apart. And we can do that by pushing on them. We can do that by questioning them, but we also have to be willing to do that with ourselves. So I have got to be willing to examine and critique the ways that I get really fixed around the us that I identify with. And believe me, wow, I have a lot of fixed energy in my chart. I can be stubborn as hell. If I feel threatened or if I feel like my people are being threatened, I will go to battle for us. And I am a natal Mars in Cancer, so I wonder why. But also, this is, I think, where a lot of us can grow right now, is getting into the subtleties, into the details of where do we divide ourselves and how does that happen? And in the places where we divide ourselves, doing something new. What is something new? So if you're a person who is totally conflict avoidant and every time you come up to an us and them kind of thing, you back down and you're like, okay, whatever, like, we're all one. I don't want to get into it with you. Like, this is so divisive. Then maybe what's new for you right now is to push back and to actually advocate for your group. And if you're a person who is ready to jump into action to protect your group every single time you hear any kind of threat or possible ignorance or whatever, and you are always out there fighting the good fight, maybe now is the time for you to work on your listening capacities and soften where you typically want to jump into action. Now, Mars has a long shadow phase in its retrograde, and this shadow started back in early October. In the Mars-Sun cycle, Mars makes gets a trine from the Sun kind of shortly before it stations retrograde and direct, and this describes the kind of movement schematic of the reversal period. So I want to encourage you to think back to October, but then really think back to like the end of November. November 27th was when the Sun was trine to Mars, and then Mars stationed retrograde on December 6th. As a period of time when things really started to feel like they got compressed and intense and maybe slowed down, or at that time there was some kind of force coming through and you've been like locked in a battle since then, or maybe you felt threatened and activated. Your action potential might be real riled up, or maybe you've been in a state of freeze or something like that. But since November, December, and again, your 2025 readings will have more personal information. But since that period of time, there's been a kind of, I'm going to say like a bottlenecking of energy. And in the bottlenecking, I think that one of the things that bottlenecks a lot of us the quickest and the most intensely, and this is about to be scandalous, okay? I think that one of the things that messes us up the most, especially those of us on the left, are our virtues. It's where we feel the most virtuous. You know, it's like where we think like, this is the way, and this is where I'm right, and this is how I'm fighting the good fight, and this is what makes me better than you. And oh God, especially white women, okay? Just speaking in the us of white femmes right now, like we have been socialized to really believe in our virtues and our virtuousness, especially of our innocence, right? And our goodness, and like, oh, I just really want to help. Those kinds of feelings thwart us. They get in the way of us using our voices. They get in the way of us being accountable to our actual impact. They dislodge us from our own power potential and action potential. And they have us submitting preemptively a lot of the time, and then taking action in ways that are like honestly kind of fucking weird and manipulative or passive aggressive. And Mars in Cancer can really do that. Speaking as a Mars in Cancer person, you know, a big emphasis of my life, and I'm getting into my 40s now, and so I'm hoping that it's starting to evolve and change, but it's, wow, having clear, direct action can be really challenging with Mars in Cancer, because you don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, and you're sensitive too. And honestly, like, I really don't want to fight. Like, I want people to be taken care of. And then when confronted with fuckery, clear, decisive action can feel really hard. What often happens is hysteric outbursts and undermining and passive aggression. And since the election, okay, so November, December, we're thinking about this Mars retrograde, I have been watching people on the left be passive aggressive, be totally manipulative, be so hypersensitive, and then cut each other down and get into ridiculous, stupid fights about things where actually there's clear agreement, but different ways of thinking about it or talking about it. And I think that this is what we have to get past. And I know I'm not alone in this, and there's lots of people out there who are doing really amazing work around loving corrections and abolition work and trauma work. And this is the work of our generation. I think a lot of us are really needing to come to the table around conflict in very different ways. And if you resonated at all with anything that I just said, then I want to say that as Mars stations direct as we get into Pisces season, there is an increase and a quickening of action potential. The Sun will trine Mars on March 7th, and actually we'll have a grand water trine that day. The moon will have just moved into Cancer. Vesta will be in Scorpio, trining Mars and the Sun. And this is a very powerful influence to be taking action around what you most deeply feel is right. Now, feelings are the realm that need our discernment. And as we move into Pisces season, we are moving into eclipse season, and we are also moving into retrograde season. Venus is already in its pre-retrograde shadow, and Venus stations retrograde on March 1st at 10 degrees of Aries. Now, over the course of Venus's retrograde, and it's shadow period. So moving direct, then retrograding, then moving direct again, shadow periods on either side of the retrograde. Over the course of Venus's retrograde and shadow, Venus will form conjunctions with Saturn, Neptune, and the North Node 3 times in Pisces. So Venus is in Aries for the duration of Pisces season, but Venus has been in Pisces recently. It already formed its first conjunctions with Saturn, Neptune, and the North Node in January. And when we get into Aries season, Venus is going to retrograde back into Pisces. So Venus is crossing the vernal equinox point, the first degree of the zodiac. It's moving back over the last degrees of the zodiac and forming conjunctions with Neptune and Saturn in the North Node. Venus and Mars are a pair, and together they both have a lot to do with attraction to pleasure and aversion from pain. And Venus typically is the symbol that really talks to us about our pleasures. And our pleasures are not always our necessities, but sometimes they are. Everyone needs sweetness to survive. We need the good stuff in life if we're going to be here living. And Venus is moving from Aries, the sign of selfness, back into Pisces, the sign of the collective. It's moving from cardinal fire, initiation and action, warlike energy, into mutable water. Oh my God, there's feelings everywhere and so much is going on. Now, Venus already formed its conjunctions with Saturn, Neptune, and the North Node. And I've been talking in my somatic space classes since then about big breakup energy. And if you saw my breakup post on Instagram, you maybe heard me talking about it then. The first half of 2025 is such big breakup energy. And this Venus conjunction with Saturn, I think, is a big part of this. It's a big thing that's describing this. Do you feel like this? Like, I feel like I've never been more clear in certain ways about a lot of things. Definitely about some relationship dynamics. Venus is a big descriptor of relationship dynamics. And when it comes to like my wants and needs, and Venus especially is about wants and needs, and that includes our basic needs: housing, food, relationships, some kind of stability, our desires, different for everybody. When Venus retrogrades, we make sacrifices. We have got to put things to rest. And a lot of you are familiar with the story of Inanna's descent. So Inanna is the granddaughter of Enki. And part of how she comes out of the underworld is Enki getting some dirt out of underneath his fingernails and sending little tiny beings down to help her escape the underworld. That's another story for another time. With the Venus retrograde as a symbol, what we have is a kind of dark night of the soul. We have the feeling of big loss, losing what we desire most, somehow not having what we need. This could be reality, and this could also be fantasy or the threat of something. And this is a period of time where there's a lot of reckoning, because there's a lot of loss that has happened, that is happening, and that could happen. And the pressure that people are feeling around money, the economy, right? Basic needs, housing, food, some kind of stability, is really affecting our relationships, and it's affecting the ways that we are working with our resources. This Venus retrograde is such a powerful time to break up with things that do not serve you and do not serve life. Divest from the bullshit out there. Take your money out of the big banks and put it in credit unions. If you own stocks, Don't invest in weapons. Don't invest in fossil fuels. Put your investment money in sustainable, carbon neutral solutions and, minority owned businesses or whatever. Do something different with your money. Cancel your Amazon Prime subscription. Do you still have it? Fucking cancel that shit. Jeff Bezos doesn't give a shit about you. That guy is laughing all the way to Mars while this planet burns. Use your money strategically. Take part in global strikes. There are a bunch of them being organized. I think there's one happening on February 28th. I could be wrong. In my show notes, I'm going to link to something called Power Beyond Platforms. This is a project in part being organized by the astrologer Laura Chung, who is going to be a guest at Embodied Astrology on March 22nd. She is coming to have a conversation about Venus retrograde and how we can use it to strategically organize. And if you are a member, you get to come and pay attention because maybe it'll be open for more people as well. March 22nd, Laura Chung, be there. Anyway, Power Beyond Platforms has a lot of information on how to divest, how to support mutual aid, how to actually do something tangible with your resources that, if enough of us do it, does have an impact. When it comes to our relationships, this is a time for generative conflict. It is something that I have been feeling so strongly this year. And as a natal Mars and Cancer person, I really don't like conflict, and I have actively avoided it in a lot of ways. And this year, I am not anymore. And I'm really grateful to Ramon Parish, who taught a Constellations of Conflict series with Embodied Astrology last year. You can buy the recordings. They're really, really, really helpful. Coming up at Embodied Astrology in 2025, more information coming soon. We're going to have more offerings around conflict and accountability with astrology. And this is a time to up-level our conflict skills. This is a time to make a stand for what we actually really want. And that means in your personal life, it means in the institutions that you're a part of, it means as parents, it means as family members, and as citizens of planet Earth. This is a time to use our voices, to use our money, to engage in our relationships in ways that actually have us oriented towards what is most important to us. And if we don't do it now, we are looking at losses beyond what we can even fathom at the moment. Some of you can fathom it, okay? Some of you can fathom it very well. But many of us have not even begun to imagine how bad it can get. And this is a time that needs all hands on deck. So don't delay. Don't be scared about it. The only guarantee in your life ever was that you were going to die. This is not a time to fantasize about perfect outcomes where everything is just rainbows and roses all over the place. It's probably not going to happen in our lifetime. But a lot of good things could happen in our lifetimes if enough of us mobilize to make it happen. And now's the time to make it happen. Don't wait. Mercury is stationing retrograde also at the end of Pisces season. So Mercury enters its pre-retrograde shadow with the Pisces new moon around 27th, 28th of February. As Mercury moves through its shadow, it will make a conjunction with the North Node and Neptune the first 2 days of March as Venus is stationing retrograde. Mercury will then move into Aries on March 3rd. Its first major aspect is a sextile with Pluto in Aquarius. Mercury and Venus form a conjunction on March 11th. And then on March 13th, 14th, Mercury is stationing retrograde. This is happening while the Sun is conjunct with Saturn, then moving into a conjunction with the North Node and Neptune. And this is also happening while we get our first eclipse of the year on March 13th, which is a lunar eclipse in Virgo. as Mercury stations retrograde in Aries and begins to move back into Pisces, we're living at a time when there's so much misinformation and disinformation and just wild information, and it's super overwhelming. Our minds are activated. Our speech is activated. A lot of us are feeling real fired up. Mercury in Aries is definitely going to increase the kind of like warrior-like, war-like energies in the realms of communication and information. Now, as Mercury moves back into Pisces, as it moves through this whole shadow, wow, just so many losses, right? So many things are being dissolved, being destroyed, being dismantled. We have an administration that is actively allying with totalitarian governments all over the world, with populist, nationalist, white supremacist movements. There is a real threat of what I'm going to say is World War III coming up. And pretty much any astrologer who is willing to talk about politics will probably be talking about that in 2025 and 2026. And I'd say through the 2020s, through the rest of the 2020s. Now, World War III, in my opinion, if it happens, is a polarity shift. The poles of power, as they have been organized since World War II, are changing. And there are other global powers rising. And so whether that's China, whether that's the global South, whether that's a United States-Russia alliance, I don't know. But the poles of power are definitely shifting. And the way that the United States has been positioned as, like, you know, everybody's big brother, is not going to be the vibe anymore. The United States is full of its own self. And unless we can transform, and I think that we can, not transition power to another group of white men who are just going to do the same old shit in a new way, but transform and actually achieve the vision that this country stole from the Haudenosaunee Confederacy of true democracy, where everybody's life is precious, and where we, the people, organize around right to self-determination for individuals. And that means you get to be trans if you're trans, right? You can practice your own religion. You can pursue life, love, liberty, and happiness. And maybe there's some kind of system that we can figure out that, and I don't know what it's called, socialized democracy or whatever, you know, like maybe there's some kind of system that we can figure out where wealth production doesn't require total extraction and pillage of all of the Earth's resources and all of our human resources, and where we as a nation are not completely invested in incarceration and punishment as our moral superiority program, but we're actually really invested in reparation and rehabilitation and reconnection with each other. Maybe we can achieve the dream of this place and all places being spaces where people can thrive. I don't know. Maybe that's me just being woke and delusional. You can decide. My feeling is that people have always been travelers. We have moved across the earth forever, studying the ways that all of our ancient ancestors originated from the one mother on the African continent and moved up and around when all of the continents were connected by great sheets of ice. And people, nomadic tribes of people, moved around, siblings, cousins, extended family. We have always been people in motion. And all of our technologies and everything that makes life cool and interesting for people, our arts, our cultures, our religions, our philosophies, they have always been technologies that have been developed in relationship. That's how brilliance happens. That's how life on Earth happens and thrives, is through biodiversity meeting itself, through potential meeting itself. I believe that in the future of the world where I want to live, there are no more borders. And somehow people have united to realize our common aims of enjoying our lives and taking care of each other and the earth. And it actually doesn't feel that complicated to me. It feels like a big paradigm shift and a rebellion and betrayal of the ideas that some people can have lives that are way more protected and full of stuff than other people. But if we, as the global we, shifted our priority to taking care of each other and taking care of what cares for us all, the planet, we would figure out the answers to all of the problems that we have in a couple of weeks. It would not take us that long. The problem is the ways that we divide ourselves and we go to war with ourselves. So Mercury, the mind, language, concepts, perception, cognition, is stationing retrograde in Aries, the sign of the self, the sign of the individuated person, the sign of the warrior. And it's going back into Pisces, the sign of the everything, the sign of the humidity in the atmosphere and the oceans that live inside of our bodies. We need to have conversations about how we're all in it together in ways that don't erase our differences or try and fit everybody into the same box. We need to have conversations about what has happened to us in our lineages and our histories and our peoples in ways that don't pit certain groups of people against each other in perpetuity. How can we hold these big conversations? I'm going to make a stand here that astrology and embodiment are two ways that we can hold these conversations really effectively. And it totally depends on how we come to those conversations, because astrology and embodiment can both be used as tools of all of the isms also. But as frames of reference, they are inherently non-binary, generous, and radically inclusive. I have experienced over the last 5 years, because in the beginning of the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction cycle is when Embodied Astrology started to build a virtual community, and we started doing more collective conversations and really became invested in sharing astrology as a kind of democratic language. Everybody has access to it. I might be the main talking head for now, but that's not my intention in an ongoing way. And if you've been following EA for a while, then you've seen it happening. You've seen this platform changing. More and more people are taking leadership inside of Embodied Astrology. I have a cohort of about 30 people in a practitioner program, and I can't wait to expand the conversation at EA in a more public way for more of them to come in. Because astrology is a language that we all get to speak. And when more of us are speaking it, wow, so much consciousness and awakening is possible. For me to be in the monthly tea time conversations and hear 25 people talking about the same transit in their chart, and to watch their comments going through the chat, and everybody's having their own personal experiences, but also people are resonating with each other. Oh yeah, that thing that's happening for you, this is how it's happening for me. And this is a language that allows us to not bypass our differences, but also transcend them. This is a language that allows us to be in our social locations and positionalities and all the limitations and benefits and gifts of them, and not only be in them. So we can have conversations about whiteness and racism and gender binaries and whatever systems of oppression in ways that allow everybody to have a space at the table inside of those conversations, and to feel that the lineages that we come from are lineages that have evolved on planet Earth, where trauma has been happening for a really long time, where people have been moving often in ways that are very reactive and unconscious and not able to discern what is real and what is not real. And we can have conversations about what's going to happen and what's possibly happening now that includes so many different varieties and iterations and potentials, because that's the language of astrology. That's what it does. And when we combine that language with somatic intelligence and embodied awareness, and we can track inside of ourselves, oh, this is how Mars retrograde is moving through me. This is where I'm feeling activated. This is where I'm feeling really protective and defensive. This is where I want to go to war with someone who I'm perceiving as different. And this is a choice. I could work with it in a different way. The combination of astrology and embodiment allow for space. They allow for choice. Because we can see the ways that these energies and influences move through us. We can feel the ways that they move through us. We can have a perspective of them that's bigger than us, that includes all of us. And inside of that, there's actually so much choice. So, the last thing that I'm going to say in this episode, maybe I'll end by 2.5 hours, is eclipses. We're coming up on eclipses. There is a lunar eclipse in Virgo on March 13th, and there will be a solar eclipse in Aries on March 29th. Now, the lunar eclipse in Virgo is the second eclipse in a series of eclipses that began last September with a lunar eclipse in Pisces, and won't culminate until February of 2027 with another lunar eclipse in Virgo. The South Node is currently in Virgo, as I've already mentioned. The North Node is in Pisces. And the nodes entered Pisces and Virgo in January, and the nodes moved backwards. So they moved from the Aries-Libra axis. Now on March 29th, we'll be in Aries season, and the solar eclipse that we get on that day is an eclipse in Aries, and that is the last eclipse in Aries. And that series of eclipses started around the time actually that Saturn went into Pisces in April of 2023. So the first thing that I'm going to say is that eclipses are weird. And when we get close to eclipse energies, things get pretty strange in my experience. And when I say strange, I mean it on a somatic level. I often feel like I'm microdosing psilocybin or something around eclipses, and I'm not. But I feel that way. Like my body feels kind of gooey. My mind feels like a little more jelly. I might have like thoughts that come out of nowhere that totally change my consciousness. And this is the thing about eclipses, is that things can come out of nowhere and really shift your perspective. And think about what an eclipse is, right? It's like a weird kind of light, a strange kind of light that does a different thing to your perspective. Now, in many traditions and cultures, eclipses are considered to be omens of bad news. Take what works for you, leave the rest. I choose to open to the potential for negativity and positivity in everything. And I really feel that there is a spectrum of possibility always. So I think eclipses are weird. And in the weirdness, I think that there are a lot of potentials. Now, this particular eclipse is a lunar eclipse. It's in Virgo. It's conjunct the South Node. It's almost exactly opposing Saturn. The sun will oppose Saturn the day before. It's sextile with Mars in Cancer. The sun has just trined Mars in Cancer, so we have this quickening of energy as Mars is starting to pick up speed from its retrograde and finishing that cycle. And this eclipse is also trine with Uranus in Taurus. Now, South Node Virgo eclipse is definitely giving me the feeling of we are living in a time of polycrises on an environmental level. And we can expect that 2025, 2026, and into the 2030s, there will be acceleration of climate crisis events. And I would not be surprised at all if the eclipses bring us some big ones. This is also a period of time where we have a increase in fundamentalism and in specific religious wars. And the eclipse degree, 23 degrees of Virgo, if you're interested, the eclipse degree talks about innocence and this notion of innocence and childlike innocence. But the South Node is there. Venus's station retrograde, actually, if you look at the Sabian symbol, pertains to the president of a country. And Mercury's retrograde degree, which is, they're respectively 10 and 9 degrees of Aries, talks about a teacher giving new symbolic forms to traditional images. In the notes that I wrote for myself, the Venus retrograde symbol, in Dane Rudyard's description of it, he talks about the purging of the priesthood and rooting out corruption. A religious organization succeeds in overcoming corruption and perverted practices of materialized ideas. This is where Venus will station direct, in Pisces. Now, sorry, I'm a little all over the place at the moment, but I did have a connection between all these. So Virgo and Pisces as an axis symbolically really brings us to themes around religiosity and spirituality, which are not always the same thing. Neptune in Pisces and Neptune in Aries, and Neptune will be ingressing Aries on March 30th, cyclically are periods of time when religious wars are really a vibe. And this is totally something that is happening currently. And I think that we're at the end of the age of Pisces, moving into the age of Aquarius. And the age of Pisces, the last 3,000 years or so, has been an age when saviors have been the thing that everybody's convinced about. And whether that's the Buddha or the prophets or Christ, in some ways it's like that guy. It's one of those guys. And even though all of the main traditions of the age of Pisces, Buddhism, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, all of them have their mystic, Gnostic sects that totally understand the oneness of divinity and don't do the mental miscalculation of dividing people based on irrelevant actual differences like genitals. All of these traditions have also enacted horrific violence, religious-based violence, colonial violence, all of them. And we are living in a moment when all of these religions are centralizing power that's militarized. So it doesn't matter which one you look at, every single one of them, Buddhism included, there are militant operations of religious fundamentalism where there is a war against another group. As we move towards these eclipses, my guess is that the climate crisis and religious terrorism and the kinds of terrorism that thrive on othering and supremacy ideals about one group opposed to another group. Pick your group, because you know what? There's multiple groups out there who think they're better than everybody else. That this is gaining intensity. Okay, so that's scary, no doubt. It's totally fucking terrifying. We know where that goes. There's nothing new there. We know where that goes. And we know that if those energies get big enough, they're going to wipe out everything. We know that on Earth right now, just in one country, there are enough nuclear warheads to completely destroy all life on Earth. Quickly, like in a day. We could be done. That's totally a possibility. What we don't know is what happens if we don't believe those things en masse. What we don't know is what happens when we betray the fundamentalist ideals from inside of the institutions. I know that there are lots of Christian fundamentalists out there right now doing terrible, scary things. I also know that there are groups of radical activist Christians who are here for the sovereignty of all beings, regardless of what they believe in, and who are at the front lines fighting for the rights of trans people. I know that there are Muslims and Jews and Hindu people and Buddhists and atheists who don't want division amongst groups of people based on anything. Gender, religion, whatever, language. What happens if there's enough of us who betray our allegiance to our separateness? That's what I'm curious about. So the South Node in Virgo and the North Node in Pisces as eclipse energies are potentials that can definitely lead us towards religious fundamentalism. Totally. But they are also potentials that can lead us towards a dissolve and collapse of othering ideologies. And that's where I want to go. And I know that in order to go that direction, there needs to be a vibe shift. There needs to be a perspective shift. There needs to be a consciousness shift. And I know that if I am trying to push momentum in that direction, that I have to be shifting in myself as the main impetus, as the main motivation in everything that I'm doing. So that means that I can't hurl insults at white supremacists, even though I really want to. That means that I can't make it all the fault of billionaires, even though I really think it is. But guess what? They're billionaires because of us. Their dominance is built on our consumption and complicitness. And in order for me to take part in dismantling wealth inequality from where I am as a person who doesn't have a lot of wealth comparatively, the most radical thing for me to do is find ways to buy less and share more and work with the interior parts of me that have been programmed to think that I can't trust people and that I need to have all of my own whatever it is, that I need to stockpile whatever it is. That's totally scary because it is a time of scarcity. It is a time of threat and a lot of instability. But this feels like the work for me right now. So take what works and leave the rest. I think that these eclipses are asking us to be less critical and more discerning. I think they're asking us to really do the work of tuning in with our feelings in ways that allow us to actually be of service to the greatest good for all. We are moving into Aries season after this. Neptune will move into Aries. Saturn will move into Aries. We'll have a solar eclipse in Aries coming up in March. Venus and Mercury will both station direct in the late degrees of Pisces, and then they will move back into Aries, and all of this will activate the Aries point and the very first degree of the zodiac, and there are new potentials waiting to be born. History does repeat itself, but transformation is also possible. Transformation requires a dying process. It requires us to really grapple with our fear. It requires us to let go of what isn't useful and what won't serve the aims of true transformation and evolution. What does that mean to you? I'm going to leave it there. I'm at 2 hours and 38 minutes. And if you have made it this far, thank you so much for your time and attention. Thank you for listening. I would love to know what you think. What are your thoughts? How does this astrology land for you? What's the meaning that you're making? Tell me in the comments. Better yet, come to an embodied astrology event. As I mentioned, we're going to have a conversation coming up with Laura Chung on March 22nd. There will be other opportunities to tune in with us in a more public conversarial way over the course of 2025. Stay tuned. We have some really interesting programming coming up. And you can get on the Embodied Astrology newsletter and mailing list. If you go to our website and click join, you can join our circle community for free. If you join our community, you will get access to all kinds of things. You'll get my monthly horoscopes and overviews when they come out, along with written, edited transcripts. You'll also get access to our audio video library of astrologically inspired mind-body practices. If you want to practice coherence and tune in with your energy field, so do I. And I've shared a lot of practices, and maybe you'll find some benefit in them. We have a bulletin board and conversation space and a blog, and that's all for free. And we also often will host open conversations with astrologers, with artists, with activists, with luminaries, with our community members. And over the course of 2025, that's really going to be a focus. So if you are looking for spaces where you can practice speaking non-binary languages and coming into connection and community through the work of astrology and embodiment, Embodied Astrology is the place for that. And if you want more, become a member. Our memberships have a sliding scale. There are scholarships available. If you are experiencing financial hardship, there's no reason why you still can't become a member. All you need to do is fill out the scholarship form. We've got you. And we have weekly gathering spaces and somatic space where we do mind-body practices. The community there really just makes my heart feel happy. Every single week, I am reminded that there are wonderful, heartfelt, thoughtful, intelligent, tender people practicing with me, making the world a place that I want to live in. We have monthly tea time gatherings. We have study groups and chart study groups. And we are working on some new programming for 2025 and are going to continue to offer classes, workshops, trainings, etc. Everything and more in the show notes below. Please share this if you love it. And if you have the coinage, send us a donation and help us continue to make these free offerings. I'm wishing you all the best in Pisces season. Bye for now.